There's a movement afoot here in Ann Arbor so that we set up our own utility and separate from DTE. And let's start off with explaining that, then I'll get into some of your questions and whatnot. But explain what you guys are doing, what the goal is, how you think you're going to pull it off, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So our organization is Ann Arbor for Public Power. We've been organizing for about 3 years now around this idea of creating a public power utility for the city of Ann Arbor. Initially, we got together mostly around climate concerns. We were looking at the city's climate commitments to the 2030 carbon neutrality goals, and we were looking at DTE's energy mix. And from our vantage point, we didn't see a way for the city to really reach their goals while remaining with DTE. However, as we dug into this more and more, we realized that public power utilities across the state and across the country tend to have considerably cheaper power while providing considerably more reliability. And as our reliability issues have only continued to worsen in those intervening years, the focus of our campaign has also become largely around increasing the reliability for the city of Ann Arbor, while also providing a pathway to reach our climate goals.
Yeah, and as a resident of the city of Ann Arbor, I've gone through 3 of them for a total of 8 days, 2 of them in the winter when my condo got down to 45 degrees. Yeah. And then, of course, that recent one where we had that hurricane wind come through and we were down for another 2 days. So I live in a big complex with 600 units, so they were kind of giving us high priority because there were so many of us in a small area, right? But anyway, so let's talk about that. This is not an inexpensive thing to do because you'd have to essentially buy the assets from DTE, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely has a high price tag when you just look at what the cost of it is, right? The state constitution does give the city of Ann Arbor the legal right to force the sale of all electrical infrastructure within the city boundaries, right? But the city of Ann Arbor will have to reasonably compensate DTE for that cost. The benefit of public power is that you're not only just buying the infrastructure, you're buying the customer base, right? You're buying a revenue base along with that. And the revenue from the utility payments, the energy payments that we're already making to DTE would instead be going to the city. And that would provide a revenue base to pay off the financing that the city would take out to be able to purchase these assets.
Well, the city would also then have to hire a lot of folks to manage it and maintain it and that sort of thing. So it would be a job creator as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. It would be a lot of local good jobs. We've had some good conversations with the unions around power, and we're making a focus on making sure that labor is included in this, and that we're providing that kind of just transition to workers throughout a transformation like this. But yeah, it would be a lot of local jobs and money that previously was leaving the community that's now staying within.
Yeah, I mean, DTE obviously is a publicly traded company, and their focus is more, I wouldn't say more on shareholders, but certainly is on shareholders. I mean, I do read their reports and I watch their sessions when they do the analyst updates and that sort of thing. And just to let you all know, I did invite a spokesman from DTE to appear on the show, not to debate Greg, but as in the next segment, but they declined. So let's talk about that. So 100% renewable power is something you want to pull off. How are you going to do that? I mean, wind, solar, what?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the exact energy mix is probably something that's better left to engineers and people who are more familiar with energy markets than I am. However, there's 2 main pathways for a power utility to, provide power, right? One, they can either generate the power themselves, and the city of Ann Arbor would have the ability to do that. In fact, currently under DTE, the amount of local distributed generation, you can read that as rooftop solar, is capped. The current cap is 1%, but a recent lawsuit actually just got DTE to raise that to 6%, which is a victory, though it's still too small. If we had our own utility, we could remove that cap, right? And we could maximize the amount of rooftop solar potential within the city of Ann Arbor. However, even if you got as much rooftop solar as you possibly could in the city of Ann Arbor, you're not going to provide all of Ann Arbor's power, right? To make up that gap, you're most likely going to be looking into a power purchase agreement. I think that your last speaker actually worked, ITC is a company that works kind of in this field, right? The large scale regional distribution grid is not owned by DTE, right? The kind of umbrella over that is called MISO, and they serve the region, and then they're networked together with several other entities like this that form the national grid. we can do power purchase agreements off of that grid to be able to pull in renewable power from outside of the city. So the goal would be for the city to secure power purchase agreements with renewable generators across the state or even outside of the state.
Well, the other question too, I guess I would have is we the biggest dog here in town is the University of Michigan. And so, what do they think about all this? They like the idea? I'm sure you've been talking to them, right?
Yeah, we've got some good relationships with different people at the University of Michigan. At the administration level, we haven't really gotten any firm opinions one way or the other. U of M has their own contract with DTE that's exempt from some of the type of, essentially most cities in Michigan have a perpetual franchise agreement with their power provider due to something called the Foot Act. U of M is an anomaly in many things, including their power generation. They have their own agreement and they're allowed to switch who they want to go with. So U of M would have the choice of whether to go with Ann Arbor's public power utility or to stay with DTE. We believe that there's every reason for them to go with Ann Arbor's utility. For one, the city of Ann Arbor is almost certainly going to be able to offer them a lower price, especially in the long run. They'll be able to upgrade the reliability, which is a major point of the campaign. And also, U of M also has their own climate goals. And if the city was able to provide them with 100% renewable power, that would be a good way towards meeting those.
Absolutely. And so let's talk about expenses for, folks like me that pay a power bill in Ann Arbor. You were saying it would go down in your projections. Is that right?
Yeah. Over the long run, municipal utilities have a lot of cost advantages over private power utilities. In the short run, we'll have to see. There's a feasibility study actually coming out early next month that should be able to give us some projections on what that'll look like. We suspect that we'll be able to at least be similar to DTE in cost. But over the long run, as you pay off the debt of the acquisition and you start to kind of make up the reliability debt that we're currently going to have to pay into, right? We're going to have to pay some money to upgrade the reliability. Cost should go down. And the reason for that is not too complicated. The city of Ann Arbor, for one, is not going to be drawing a profit margin off of the power bills, right? Currently, DTE enjoys a 14% profit margin. That's money that's just going to shareholders. It's not going back into the grid at all. And also, the city has access to cheaper financing, right? Public power utilities will typically finance 100% debt-based using municipal debt. Municipal debt's very cheap, typically less than 1% in interest rates. Corporate debt is considerably more expensive, right? And DTE is not only financing with corporate debt, they're financing 50-50 debt to equity. And the state guarantees them a nearly 10% return on their equity, right? So you've got cheaper access to financing, you don't have a profit margin, you don't have the overhead of marketing and lobbying and all of these other things that DTE does. And that tends to lead to lower costs for public power utilities. And you can see this across the state. Lansing, Traverse City, Chelsea, Wyandotte, Holland, they all have public power utilities and they pay considerably less than we do to DTE while having more reliable power.
Do you have any idea how old the grid is here in Ann Arbor? The reason I raise that issue is just, I've lived here about 9 years, and at least once a year the power goes down. And of course, this year it's gone down 3 times. Are they, I've read some reports that DTE wasn't investing as much as they should in maintenance because they were trying to keep a higher profit margin and dividends for the shareholders. Again, I wish they were here to discuss that with me. What is your thinking on that? Is the grid just not being maintained like it should be?
Absolutely. Yeah. Unfortunately, DTE really seems to have made the decision to prioritize investing in our politics rather than our grid. We have seen some comments from DTE about how they're making larger investments recently. And, we think that our campaign might be part of that. But if they are investing heavily, it's certainly not helping. Our reliability issues are getting worse. And the state has also taken notice of that, right? The MPSC ordered an audit of their electrical grid. A state report found that many parts of the grid was 40 years past its functional end of life, which means that it should have been replaced 40 years ago. And from just anecdotal conversations that groups in my organization have had with line workers, they've told us that the grid is in very bad shape and that it would take a lot to really get it to a point where it's not going to have these types of reliability issues. So yeah, and you can kind of see where the money's going, right? In their most recent quarter, DTE had 100% higher returns than they made $211 million last quarter, right? That's money that could have been going back into the grid, but instead of going to shareholders. And that has a cost over time.
Well, certainly, I know we cover EVs, we cover battery plants and whatnot, and we've lost a couple of battery plants to the south because the electric rates are so high up here. And if you're building EV batteries, it's just like an aluminum plant. You're going to be sucking up a lot of electricity, right?
Absolutely. And those 4 plants that left the state, they actually went to communities with public power utilities that were offering them much cheaper electrical rates.
Okay. Got about 5 minutes left. So let me ask you a few more questions. What's the process look like now, and where is the process going? In other words, as you make this drive towards a public utility, where are we on that spectrum?
Absolutely. So the first step is already underway, and that's to do a feasibility study. As I mentioned, that feasibility study should be released sometime early next month from what we've heard from the city. And that outlines essentially what is the cost of the acquisition, a rough estimate, and what is the cost of operating the utility. And based off of that, you can estimate your debt service, and then that's going to get your yearly cost. And then you can estimate what are your electrical rates that you need to charge to make up for that cost, right? So it essentially says, is this economically feasible? Can we run a utility at a rate that's at least within the realm of reason of what DTE's rates are, right? And so that should be good data. And assuming that we don't have any red flags there, which if you look at other communities that have gone through the same process, it's very unusual for there to be any major red flags at this step of the process. We would be looking to go towards evaluation of DTE's assets, right? So it's typically called a phase 2 feasibility study. You actually put boots on the ground, you go look at the infrastructure that you want to buy, and you get an actual estimate of what you should offer DTE for those assets. Once the city has that, they can make an offer to DTE. DTE does have to sell if the city makes an offer, but they can contest the price and most likely will. And so likely a court will have to settle exactly what the price of the assets would be. Once the city has a court-ordered price, or at least DTE's agreed to a price, they would need to go to authorize the funding. And the revenue bonds that the city would take out for the funding needs to be approved by a vote of the people. You need a 60% vote on the ballot to be able to do that. Once we've done that vote, there's a bit of a where there's a transition between DTE to the city, and then the city starts to operate their own utility.
Okay. And so let's just let folks know if they want to find out more about how to get plugged into what you're doing, or at least get their interest taken care of. How do they do that? I know you have a website because I've been there, but why don't you tell the audience how they can find it?
Absolutely. It's AnnArborPublicPower.org. We've got a lot of great information, and then we're on Twitter, or X, I suppose, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, I think, at A2 Public Power. So you can find us there.
And can they reach out to you personally? I know I have. So want to give up your email address or not?
Absolutely. It's AnnArborPublicPower@gmail.com. If you send us an email, we'll try to be back to you promptly with a response.